At 16 years old, Mara Bellamy stood alone on the levee at Whistle Bend with no family beside her, no bed waiting after sundown, and only $5 folded inside her mother's old hymn book. Her stepfather, Harlan Crutch, had abandoned her after selling the last of her mother's belongings, claiming a girl with no blood tie to him and too many questions about missing river deeds was no burden of his to carry. With that $5, Mara bought the rotting river packet boat tied behind the county warehouse, a narrow, weather-beaten vessel called the Juniper Rose that no pilot wanted because its boiler was cold, its paint peeled in ribbons, and its cabin smelled of mildew and old river mud. The townspeople called it a foolish purchase, a child's desperate shelter floating one storm away from sinking. But beneath the pilot seat, sealed in oilcloth and hidden from every greedy hand that had searched the boat before her, waited a fortune in land grants that would change Mara's life and restore an entire river community. Settle in, and let us tell you the story of Mara Bellamy. If you are listening from a place where people have ever counted you out, tell us where you are watching from. Mara Bellamy was born along the brown, restless sweep of the Parnell River in a settlement called Willow Junction, where every child learned the sound of steamboat whistles before they learned the names of distant cities. The river was not merely water there. It was road, market, weather, warning, and memory. It carried flour barrels, cotton bales, church bells, coffins, mail sacks, soldiers' letters, gambling men, widows in black, and children leaning over railings to watch driftwood spin in the current. It took things, too. It took docks in flood season, mules that slipped from ferry ramps, men who trusted moonlight too much, and once, when Mara was 7, it took her father. Her father, Asa Bellamy, had been a river clerk on packet boats, not a captain and not a wealthy man, but one of those steady souls without whom no captain's reputation could survive. He kept manifests in clean columns, remembered which farmer preferred payment in coin and which took credit until harvest, and could read the mood of a landing by the way men stood on the planks before the boat even tied up. Asa believed a name written correctly mattered. He said a misspelled name on a deed could steal from a family as surely as a thief in the night, and because of that belief, he taught Mara letters, numbers, and signatures while other little girls were still making dolls from corn husks. At night, in the small cabin behind the landing store, Asa would spread papers across the table and show Mara how the river made promises on paper. Land grants, timber rights, dock easements, ferry claims, little rectangles of ink that could decide where a schoolhouse stood, whether a widow kept her orchard, or whether a freed family could hold the acres they had cleared by hand. Mara did not understand all of it then, but she understood her father's reverence. He touched lawful paper the way some men touched scripture. Land is memory, he told her once, holding a brittle grant near the lamp so she could see the seal. If the record is stolen, the memory can be stolen with it. Her mother, Evangeline, had less patience for ledgers and more patience for people. She washed linens for packet boats, took in mending from deckhands, and could cook river catfish in a way that made travelers ask which grand hotel had trained her. She wore her hair pinned simply, sang low while she worked, and believed a home did not have to be large to be honorable. The Bellamys had little, but what they had was orderly. A table, scrubbed pale, 2 chairs, a shelf of books Asa bought second-hand, a blue pitcher with a cracked handle, and a wooden chest, where Evangeline kept baptism records, marriage letters, and every receipt Asa said might one day matter. Mara's earliest happiness lived in small routines. Morning fog on the river, her father's pencil tapping, her mother wringing sheets beside the wash line, the bell from the packet office, the smell of coffee, damp rope, stove ash, and sun-warmed pine planks. She ran messages between landing crews, quick-footed and serious, carrying folded papers under her shawl while men laughed and called her Little Clerk. She liked that. She liked being trusted with something that must not be dropped. When she was 9, Asa began working for a stern but respected packet owner named Captain Soren Vale, who ran a riverboat called the Juniper Rose. The Juniper Rose was not the grandest vessel on the Parnell, but she was beloved along the smaller landings because she stopped where richer boats would not. She brought medicine to low-water towns, delivered school books to settlements without rail access, and carried seed grain after one bad flood-ruined spring stores. Captain Vale was aging by then, white-bearded and sharp-eyed, with a voice that could cut through engine steam and river fog alike. He trusted Asa, and more importantly, Asa trusted him. There were rumors in those years about land along the south bend of the Parnell. After the war, government grants and old territorial claims overlapped like tangled fishing line. Families who had farmed for decades discovered men in suits from county seats suddenly held papers saying otherwise. Timber companies appeared with surveyors. Speculators arrived with polished boots and soft hands. Some honest settlers could not read the documents used against them. Some freed families had deeds promised but never recorded properly. Some widows held papers dismissed as incomplete because a clerk had lost the matching book. Asa worried over those stories. He traveled with Captain Vale to small landings, copying names, gathering receipts, comparing seals, and speaking quietly with families who had no money for lawyers, but still had memory. Mara saw him come home late, his eyes tired, his coat smelling of river smoke, and watched him place envelopes inside the wooden chest beneath her mother's folded quilts. One winter evening, when sleet ticked against the window and Evangeline slept with a cough, Asa called Mara to the table. He showed her how to examine a seal without tearing paper. He showed her how to hold a document to light and see if the watermark matched the year written on it. He showed her the difference between a true ink signature and a copied hand. "Because you must learn to see what men hope you will overlook," he said. "Why me?" she asked, because she was still young enough to believe skills were given only for games or chores. Asa's face softened. "Because you notice, and because one day someone may tell you paper is nothing when it is someone's whole life." The next spring, the river rose mean and fast. Rain fell for 9 days in the uplands, and by the time the flood reached Willow Junction, the Parnell had become a moving field of trees, barrels, fence rails, and drowned earth. The Juniper Rose was caught up river near Cattail Shoals, where families were stranded on high ground with no flour and 2 children sick with fever. Captain Vale took the boat out when safer men tied theirs hard to dock posts. Asa went with him. Mara remembered the morning they left because her mother stood in the rain holding Asa's spare scarf and did not call him back. Love in their house was not possession. It was worry made brave. The Juniper Rose returned 3 days later with medicine delivered and families rescued, but Asa did not return with her. A broken spar had struck him during the night crossing, they said, and the river took him before any hand could reach. Captain Vale came himself to tell Evangeline. He removed his hat on the porch and stood like a man who had aged 10 years between landings. After that, the world narrowed. Evangeline's cough deepened. The wooden chest became heavier, with things Mara was too young to understand and too afraid to ask about. Captain Vale visited twice, bringing money he said Asa had earned and a sealed packet he told Evangeline to keep safe. Mara never saw what was inside. She saw only her mother's face go pale as she read. For a while, Evangeline survived through work. Grief made her quiet, but not useless. She scrubbed, mended, cooked, folded, and kept Mara close. Then Harlan Crutch entered their life like a man opening a door he had already measured for himself. He managed the county warehouse at Whistle Bend, a larger town downriver, and he wore respectability like a pressed coat, always visible, never truly warm. He had known Asa slightly. He had business with Captain Vale once. He presented himself as a practical man, willing to help a widow who could not live forever on laundry money. Evangeline did not marry him out of love. Mara knew that even then. She married him because the rent rose, because winter was coming, because coughs cost money, because a widow with a young daughter had to choose among dangers and call one of them shelter. Harlan moved them to Whistle Bend, where the riverfront was louder, rougher, and full of men who spoke in contracts. The cabin behind the landing store was left behind. So were the wash lines, the small garden, the view of Willow Junction's quiet bend. In Whistle Bend, they lived in 2 rooms above the warehouse office. Mara learned the smell of grain dust, wet hemp, river tar, tobacco, and Harlan's temper. He never struck her, but cruelty does not require a raised hand to make itself known. He corrected how she stood, how she read, how she answered. He called her Asa's little clerk when he wanted to mock her. He disliked the way she watched documents. He disliked more that she remembered what she saw. Evangeline became sicker in Whistle Bend. The damp air off the warehouse walls entered her lungs and stayed there. She sang less. She rested more. On clear days, she sat by the window and looked toward the levee where the packet boats came and went. Sometimes the Juniper Rose passed through, older now and less brightly painted, with Captain Vale still upright near the pilot house. Once he looked up at the warehouse window, saw Evangeline, and touched his hat. Harlan noticed. That evening, he shut the curtains hard enough to crack the wooden rod. When Mara was 14, Captain Vale died. The Juniper Rose changed hands twice, then was seized after a dispute over storage debts. Her boiler went cold. Her crew scattered. She was tied behind the county warehouse in a side channel where mud gathered around her hull and willow branches scratched her railings. People stopped calling her Juniper Rose and started calling her the Old Packet. Children dared one another to jump from her gangplank. Men stripped brass fittings and blamed river thieves. Harlan said she was fit only for scrap. Evangeline heard that and turned her face toward the wall. She carried good things once, she whispered. So did many things, Harlan said. Then they quit. By 16, Mara had grown into a quiet, watchful girl, with her father's careful eyes and her mother's endurance. She worked in the warehouse without wages, copying bills of lading, sweeping the office, tying tags to freight, and carrying messages up the levee. Harlan called it repayment for food. She called it study, though only to herself. She saw which men received private envelopes. She saw which land agents arrived after dark. She saw Harlan lock certain papers in the lower drawer of his desk, the one with a brass faceplate scratched near the keyhole. Once, while dusting, she found a scrap of tracing paper with names written in columns: Reed, Baptiste, Morrow, Ellery, Two Pine School, South Bend Chapel. Beside each was an acreage figure. When she asked Harlan what the names meant, he snatched the scrap away. "Dead claims," he said. "Then why keep them?" His eyes cooled. "Because dead things still cause stink when fools dig them up." That night, Evangeline called Mara close and pressed the old hymn book into her hands. Its cover was cracked, its pages soft from years of use. Inside the back lining, $5 had been folded so flat they felt like another page. "If ever you need to choose yourself," Evangeline said, breath thin as thread, "do not ask permission from the person who benefits from your staying." Mara wanted to ask what she meant. She wanted to ask about the sealed packet, Captain Vale, Asa's old papers, the Juniper Rose, the names Harlan called dead. But Evangeline began coughing, and questions were swallowed by water, cloth, and fear. She died before first frost. Harlan did not allow a proper mourning in the rooms above the warehouse. He said grief made workers slow and women dramatic. He sold Evangeline's blue pitcher to a peddler before Mara could stop him. He sold the wooden chest the next day, though Mara found it empty before it left. Whatever papers her mother had kept were gone. He said they were worthless receipts. Mara knew better, because he would not meet her eyes. The funeral was small, paid for partly by the churchwomen and partly by the last coins Mara had hidden from errand tips. The river was low that week, its banks showing black mud and broken shells. Mara stood by the grave and felt the world become terribly large. She had lost her father to the river, her mother to sickness, her home to Harlan's roof, and now even grief seemed something he might inventory and sell. 3 days later, he called her into the warehouse office. Rain scratched against the window. The stove had gone nearly out. "You are no kin of mine," he said. Mara stood still. "Your mother is buried. Your father is long gone. I have carried this arrangement out of respect for her, but I am not a charity. I work here. You eat here. I copy your manifests. You copy what I allow you to copy." He opened the drawer with the scratched brass plate, removed several papers, then locked it again. "There are matters being settled. River property, warehouse ownership, old debts. I will not have Asa Bellamy's girl sniffing around and confusing people. My mother had papers. Your mother had delusions. She had land names. His palm came down on the desk, not loud enough to be called violence, but loud enough to end childhood. You have 5 minutes to gather what belongs to you. Mara looked toward the corner where Evangeline's shawl had hung. It was gone. What belongs to me? She asked softly. Harlan leaned back. Whatever you can carry and prove. Those words became a door closing. Mara left the warehouse with a hymn book, 2 dresses, her father's pencil stub, a comb, and the $5. Folded in the lining. Rain had turned the levee steps slick. No one stopped her. A deckhand she knew looked away. The warehouse clerk pretended to study a crate. In towns built on trade, people learn not to offend the man who controls storage. That night, she slept beneath an overturned skiff near the old side channel, with the abandoned juniper rose looming dark above her through rain mist. The packet boat groaned against its ropes. Willow branches brushed the rail. Once, in the deep night, a loose shutter in the pilot house tapped and tapped like knuckles against wood. Mara did not sleep much. She listened to that tapping and thought of her father, who had died serving a boat that carried medicine. She thought of Captain Vale touching his hat to her mother. She thought of the names on Harlan's tracing paper. She thought of land as memory and records as the bones of justice. At dawn, the county auction bell rang. Whistle Bend held its auctions on the gravel yard beside the courthouse, where rainwater collected in wagon tracks and men stamped their boots while pretending not to be cold. The sale that morning was thin. Damaged barrels, a cracked stove, a mule harness, river rope, 3 stacks of warped lumber, and the Juniper Rose, listed as abandoned packet boat, hull uncertain, engine disabled, purchaser responsible for removal. No, one wanted her. The auctioneer tried $10, then $8, then $6. A scrap dealer spat into the mud and said the cost of towing would eat the value. Harlan stood near the courthouse steps with his arms crossed, smiling faintly, as if the boat's humiliation pleased him. Mara stood at the back of the crowd with her hymn book pressed under her arm. $5, the auctioneer called, wearily. Will anyone throw away $5 so we can move along? Mara raised her hand. Laughter moved through the yard like wind through dry reeds. The auctioneer blinked. Girl, this is not a toy sale. I have $5. Harlan turned, then the smile gone. Mara, he said, low enough that only those near him heard warning, do not make a spectacle. But she was already walking forward. She opened the hymn book, removed the folded bills, and laid them in the auctioneer's hand. Her fingers did not tremble until after she let go. The auctioneer looked at Harlan, then at the sheriff, then at the boat visible beyond the warehouse roofline, sagging in the side channel as if even she were embarrassed to be seen. No further. Bids? He asked. No one spoke. Sold, he said, almost apologetically, to Miss Mara Bellamy for $5. The laughter returned, louder now. A man called, She bought herself a sinking bedroom. Another said, Maybe the rats will pay rent. Harlan's face had gone still, which frightened Mara more than anger would have. But the deed of sale was written. The clerk recorded it. The Juniper Rose, cold, stripped, mocked, and mud-bound, belonged to her. For the first time since her mother died, Mara had a door Harlan could not lawfully shut. The boat was worse inside than it looked from the levee. Its lower deck smelled of damp wood, mouse nests, rust, stale coal smoke, and river mud. The cabin carpets had rotted into dark patches, wallpaper peeled in strips like old skin. The galley stove was cracked. Someone had removed most brass fixtures, leaving pale scars where polish had once shone. Yet in the pilot house, above the main deck, enough glass remained to catch morning light, and through those broken panes Mara could see the river curving wide and brown, indifferent and alive. The pilot seat was fixed before the wheel, a heavy wooden chair bolted to the floor, its leather cushion torn and flattened by years of use. Mara touched it carefully. Captain Vale had likely sat there. Perhaps her father had stood nearby with manifests in hand. Perhaps, on the morning he died, Asa had looked once through those windows and seen the same current Mara saw now. Under the seat, near the base, a loose board shifted beneath her boot. She knelt. The board had been cut shorter than the others and fitted so neatly that dirt hid the seam. Her father had taught her to look for such things. A nail newer than its neighbors, grain running the wrong way, dust collecting differently along an edge. She pulled out her pencil stub and used it as a lever. The board lifted enough for her fingers. Beneath it was an iron ring. Mara's breath caught. She tugged once. Nothing. She tugged again, bracing her knee against the floor. A hidden panel opened with a soft wooden sigh, releasing the smell of oilcloth, old paper, and cedar. Inside lay a packet wrapped in dark waxed canvas, tied with river cord, and sealed with a red mark pressed deep into hardened wax. She did not open it at once. Some discoveries ask first for silence. For a long moment, Mara sat on the pilot house floor while pale morning sunlight spread over the broken wheel, the torn cushion, and the hidden place beneath the seat. Outside, Whistle Bend went about its business, unaware that a girl they had laughed at was holding the beginning of a truth men had tried to bury beneath mud, debt, and time. When she finally loosened the cord, the first thing she saw was her father's handwriting. To Captain Sorin, Bale, for safekeeping, if I do not return. Mara pressed her hand against her mouth. The packet held land grants, dozens of them, each folded with care, each bearing seals, signatures, and names she recognized from Harlan's tracing paper. Reed, Baptiste, Morrow, Ellery, Two Pines School, South Bend Chapel. There were maps of the South Bend Valley, ferry rights, timber claims, dock easements, and letters from families who had entrusted Asa Bellamy and Captain Vale with proof that their land was theirs. Some grants were original, some were certified, copies. Some included notes in Asa's hand, explaining that county records had been altered or removed. At the bottom was a letter from Captain Vale, written in a firmer hand. If this packet is found, know that Asa Bellamy died protecting more than cargo. These grants belonged to families along the Parnell who were meant to be cheated by men wearing lawful coats. We hid them aboard the Juniper Rose because too many courthouse drawers had already been bought. If I cannot finish what Asa began, let the boat keep the memory until honest hands find it. Mara read the words twice, then a third time, while the river wind moved through the broken pilot house glass. Her father had not merely kept records, he had protected a valley, and now the valley's memory rested in her lap. For the next 2 days, Mara did not leave the boat except after dark. She cleaned the pilot house enough to work. She spread the documents across the floor in careful rows, weighting corners with bits of iron and broken glass. She copied names into the back pages of the hymn book. She matched maps to grants. She learned that many families who had been renting land for years had once held lawful rights to it. She learned that the Two Pines School had been built on land gifted by a woman named Ruth Baptiste, though the county now claimed it as surplus. She learned that South Bend Chapel Cemetery, where freed families had buried their dead, was marked for timber sale by a company tied to Harlan Crutch. She also learned that the grants were worth a fortune, not because they could make one person rich, but because they could return acres, docks, and water rights to people who had almost lost the power to prove they had ever belonged. The trouble was, proof is only powerful if it survives long enough to be heard. Harlan came on the third afternoon. Mara saw him from the pilot house as he crossed the gangplank in his black coat, carrying the same leather document case he always carried when he meant to take something without seeming to steal. Behind him walked Sheriff Pate, a broad man with a tired face, and Mr. Alden Rusk, a land agent whose gold cufflinks flashed even under cloudy skies. "This vessel remains tied to county-controlled frontage," Harlan called before stepping inside. "I am here to inspect for hazards." Mara had already hidden the documents beneath a loose panel behind the chart shelf, keeping only a harmless stack of mildewed receipts on the table. "You sold it at auction," she said from the doorway of the pilot house. "The boat, perhaps, not the mud beneath it." Mr. Rusk smiled. "Technicalities matter, Miss Bellamy." "So do receipts," she said. Harlan's eyes sharpened. They searched the lower deck first. Sheriff Pate apologized with his face, but not his mouth. Harlan opened cabinets, kicked aside rotten carpet, lifted bedding she had made from old sailcloth, and examined the galley stove. Rusk tapped walls with his cane, listening. When they climbed to the pilot house, Mara stood aside, because refusing would have shown fear too plainly. Harlan paused beside the pilot seat. For one terrible second, she thought he knew. His hand rested on the torn cushion. His eyes moved over the floorboards. Then the sheriff called from below, saying a plank near the stern looked unsafe, and Harlan turned away. Mara did not breathe until he left the room. At the gangplank, he stopped and looked back at her. "Children should not play, Captain," he said. "River things sink." "So do lies," Mara answered before she could stop herself. His face did not change, but Mr. Rusk heard, and that was enough. That night, someone cut one of the Juniper Rose's mooring lines. The boat shifted hard in the current, knocking against a piling until Mara woke to the groan of straining wood. She scrambled barefoot onto the wet deck, rain slicking her hair to her cheeks, and threw her weight against the remaining rope while the current tugged the packet sideways. A lantern appeared on shore, then another. Old Mr. Ives from the bait shed shouted instructions. A deckhand named Cato Reed ran down with a coil of rope, leapt onto the gangplank, and helped secure the bow before it swung into the channel. When it was over, Mara stood shaking in the rain. Cato Reed, tall and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and hands scarred from rope burns, looked at the cut line and said, "Rats don't use knives." She knew his name from the grants. Reed, your family had land at South Bend, she said quietly. His expression changed. My grandfather did. Do you have proof? He laughed once bitterly. If we did, we wouldn't be renting our own field from Rusk Timber. Mara looked toward the dark warehouse where Harlan's office window glowed faintly. Come tomorrow, before sunrise, she said. Bring someone you trust. Cato did. He brought his grandmother, Miss Adela Reed, a straight-backed woman with silver hair wrapped in a blue scarf and eyes that had outlived insult without accepting it. Mara showed them the grant bearing Josiah Reed's name, the map marking their field, and Captain Vale's letter. Adela did not touch the paper at first. She hovered her hand over it as if heat rose from the ink. My husband died saying this existed, she whispered. They called him confused. He was not, Mara said. The old woman closed her eyes, and tears slipped down her cheeks without sound. By noon, Adela had brought Reverend Moss from South Bend Chapel. By dusk, the school teacher from Two Pines had come with her own questions. Within 2 days, the pilot house of the Juniper Rose became a hidden courthouse of memory. People came quietly, one at a time or in pairs, climbing the gangplank with watchful eyes. Mara showed them what she had found. Some cried, some shook, some grew very still. The papers did not merely promise land, they returned dignity to families who had been told their memories were mistaken. But secrecy could not hold forever. Rusk moved first. He filed a claim stating the Juniper Rose contained stolen county records and demanded seizure. Harlan swore that Mara had removed documents from his warehouse. Sheriff Pate, unwilling to stand between a powerful land agent and a homeless girl, posted a notice on the gangplank giving her 24 hours to surrender all papers for review. Everyone knew what review meant. Papers could vanish during review. Mara read the notice while townspeople watched from a careful distance. The wind lifted the edge of the paper. The Juniper Rose knocked softly against the dock like an old heart refusing to stop. She was 16. She had no lawyer, no property, but a boat worth less than the rope tying it. No family name that powerful men feared. But she had learned from Asa Bellamy that land was memory. She had learned from Evangeline that choosing yourself sometimes meant refusing permission. She had learned from the river that even mud-brown water could carry a buried thing back into daylight if the current held. That evening, she carried the Grants to the only place Harlan could not easily control, the church, South Bend. Chapel stood beneath sycamores 2 miles downriver, humble and weathered, with a bell cracked from old lightning. Reverend Moss opened the door when he saw Adela Reed beside Mara holding a lantern. They laid the documents across the communion table, not as treasure, but as testimony. By midnight, witnesses had gathered, families from South Bend, the Two Pines teacher, old rivermen who remembered Captain Vale, Mrs. Ives from the bait shed, Cato Reed, and even Sheriff Pate, who arrived last and stood near the door with his hat in both hands. Mara read Captain Vale's letter aloud. Her voice trembled. At first, then steadied. She read her father's notes. She read the names. She read the acreage. She read the seals and dates as best she could. When she finished, no one spoke for a long while. Then Adela Reed stood. My husband was called a liar for 30 years, she said. Tonight, I ask this town to decide whether ink in honest hands matters less than money in dishonest ones. Sheriff Pate removed his hat completely. I will escort these papers to Judge Calder in Voss Junction, he said, and I will not go alone. Harlan arrived too late to stop the procession. At dawn, nearly 40 people walked with Mara from South Bend Chapel to the ferry road, carrying the land grants in a locked strongbox Reverend Moss had used for church records. Harlan and Rusk stood outside the warehouse as they passed. Harlan's mouth was tight. Rusk's face had gone pale with rage. But neither man could seize papers from a crowd without showing the whole town what they were. Justice in Whistle Bend did not arrive quickly. It came through hearings, affidavits, surveyors, old seals examined under magnifying glass, and testimony from men who had been silent too long. Judge Calder was not sentimental, which made his fairness harder to dismiss. He ruled first that the grants were authentic, then that the attempted seizure had no legal standing, then that certain land transfers tied to Rusk Timber and Harlan Crutch's warehouse office required investigation. The fortune under the pilot seat was not a pile of gold. It was better. It was proof. By winter, South Bend families recovered title to fields they had farmed as tenants. The chapel cemetery was protected from timber sale. Two Pine School regained the land around its well and orchard. A dock easement, once erased from the record, returned to community use, allowing small farmers to ship grain without paying Rusk's inflated warehouse fees. Lawsuits followed, but the first thread had been pulled and the cloth of deception began to loosen. Harlan's quiet justice came without spectacle. His warehouse contracts were suspended. His office was searched under order. The scratched brass drawer yielded altered copies, forged notices, and correspondence with Rusk proving they had planned to profit once families were forced from disputed land. Men who once nodded to Harlan now crossed the street without greeting him. The auction yard where Mara had been mocked became the place where his goods were inventoried for creditors. Mara did not attend that auction. She was at the Juniper Rose. With community help, the old packet boat was cleaned, repaired enough to serve safely at dock, and turned into a river records house and reading room. The pilot house, where the hidden panel had waited beneath the seat, became a small archive. Children came there to learn letters. Farmers came to read notices before signing anything. Freed families stored copies of deeds in cedar boxes. Widows brought old papers folded in handkerchiefs, and Mara helped them sort what mattered from what merely looked official. The Juniper Rose never steamed upriver again, but she carried people all the same. On the first anniversary of Mara's purchase, the town gathered beside the side channel. Cato Reed repaired the gangplank. Adela brought flowers. Reverend Moss said a prayer for those whose names had been kept alive by paper and memory. Sheriff Pate, humbler now, placed Captain Vale's letter in a glass-covered frame inside the archive. Beneath it, Mara placed Asa Bellamy's note, the one that had begun everything, to Captain Soren Vale, for safekeeping, if I do not return. She stood a long time before those words. There was no bringing her father back from the river, no restoring her mother's breath, no undoing the night she slept beneath an overturned skiff while the town passed by. But restoration is not the same as reversal. Sometimes the wound remains, and still something honorable grows around it. At 16, Mara Bellamy had been abandoned with $5 and a hymn book, standing beside a river town that believed her too young, too poor, and too alone to matter. She bought what everyone else dismissed: a ruined packet boat with a cold boiler, stripped brass, mildewed cabins, and a torn pilot seat. They laughed because they saw only decay, but under that seat waited a fortune in land grants, and in those papers waited names history had nearly swallowed. What Mara found did not make her greedy. It made her responsible. That is why we remember her, not because she became rich, though in time the town made sure she never again slept without a roof. Not because she defeated powerful men with noise, though Harlan Crutch and Alden Rusk learned that paper stolen from the poor can become a rope around the thief. We remember her because she understood what her father had tried to teach before. The river took him. Land is memory, and memory must be guarded by honest hands. The juniper rose stayed tied at Whistle Bend for many years after. Painted white again, her railings mended, her name restored in blue letters across the stern. Children who came aboard ran their fingers over the pilot seat and whispered about the hidden place beneath it. Their parents told them the truth was not magic. It had been there all along. It simply waited for a girl no one thought to fear. And perhaps that is the heart of the story. The world often hides its greatest restorations inside things it has already mocked: a forgotten boat, a poor girl, an old seat, a packet of paper no one believed existed. Yet, when the right hands open what others ignore, a whole valley can remember itself again. Thank you for settling in with us for the story of Mara Bellamy and the Juniper Rose. If this tale moved you, share it with someone who still believes. Forgotten things can carry extraordinary truth. And tell us in the comments, what is a time you found value in something others had written off? We read your reflections, and they help keep these stories alive. Until next time, stay close